She's definitely not.
So just to recap, basically on one side of the note card, you're writing friends. The other side, you're writing friendly. And then on the friends side of the note card, you're listing as many names as you can think of that you would consider a relatively close friend. It doesn't necessarily have to be super close. It could be. It doesn't have to be. This is where it's like a choose your own adventure sort of thing. It's up to you. I'll give you guys just another moment. If you want to put a question mark next to it, you can. This will come in handy later, and it'll make sense as to why you're doing this. So I'll give you guys another moment or two, and then we'll get moving. All right, so tonight, basically, we're talking about friends and friendships and what it takes to be a real friend, what the stuff of real friends are made of. Isaac?
Guys.
And so in doing with that, we're going to list a couple of examples of what being a good friend would look like. So as you're going down the list of everybody who you've written down on the friend side, if that person has not been a really good friend, as we're going to list out some of these things, nicely strike through the name, So if you put, let's just say John, and you're like, well, for the most part, John really is, like, he's an okay person, but he's not really a good friend. We're going to kind of narrow the list down. And on the other side, we're also going to kind of looking at ourselves too. We're going to look at the people who we have been friendly to in the manner of which that we're going to look at. So again, there's 2 or 3 points. I wouldn't scratch any names out yet. Just wait till we get a point or two down. Okay, then we can look at that. So, all right, I will not talk over anybody too much. I will just shoot you down. Anyways, so like I said, this month we're talking about friendships, and I'm going to do my best to avoid any unnecessary cheesiness and redundancy, but I'll try to provide you some tools and tips on how to make the most of your friendships and how to be a best friend. I've got 30 years of life experience. Look at the Bible, there's thousands of years of information in there. Of course, if you combine the adults, we've got plenty of years of experience on this. So hopefully we can pass on some good information to you guys as far as friendships. So, show of hands, who likes to be taken advantage of by a friend? Liars. Set a reminder on your phone. Oh, wait, you don't have it right now.
I
I'll do that. Set a mental reminder. Check back with me in 5 years and see if you still really want to be taken advantage of by a friend. Because it sucks.
You set a reminder for 5 years?
Try it tonight if you can remember it. So, carrying on. So we're going to take a real quick look at the Bible, at a couple of one-off verses talking about what the Bible has to say about friendship, because the Bible really does have a lot to say about a lot of things. Some things are more vague, and some things are much more directly to the point. Friendship is listed several times. So Solomon wrote a few good things. One of them is Proverbs 27:9. I'm pretty sure that one's Solomon. Oil and perfume make the heart glad, and the sweetness of a friend comes from his earnest counsel. Basically, don't lie to your friends. It's much better when you're honest and you're genuinely wanting to help them grow, right? It's having a friend giving you honest advice, especially when you ask them, is much better than saying, "Hey, what's your thoughts on this?" and they give you an answer that they think you want to hear, right? Proverbs 19 verse 4 says, "Wealth brings new friends, but a poor man is deserted by his friends." You guys observed any of that out in the wilds of nature?
Oh, I got a great example.
Somebody who has a wealth of whatever it is, whether it's money or popularity or whatever, the friends are just flocking to them. And then people who are poor, whether, again, it's money or poor in whatever category you could find, the friends are lacking a little bit in that department. But that does kind of help, show you the difference between real friends and like great friends and people who are just there. Job had his whole story is it's another story for another day. But Job chapter 6 verse 14 says, "He who withholds kindness from a friend forsakes the fear of the Almighty." Well, basically, don't, like, if you're friends with somebody, you're committing yourself, in this friendship with somebody. Don't be just withholding kindness, right? Especially to somebody who's a friend. Don't if they need you, don't just say, "Oh man, whatever, do your thing. I'm gonna abandon you." That's not, like I said, who wants to be taken advantage of by a friend? Nobody really does. Nobody really wants to be ignored by their friends. So it's not a good idea. Now, we could go through the Bible and list all these one-off verses. And the Bible does have a lot to say. They're good, they're quick, they make a simple point, and they're great to use and refer to, especially when you need a quick reminder. However, there are times when we need to see what these principles look like in action, right? Because a lot of us can think of, like we talked about wise sayings last month, and these one-liners are really great sometimes, but it's tough to see the principle in action. So, but tonight we're going to look at two different types of friendships over one big story, and I'm going to do my best to summarize because there's a lot of history going on at this specific point in time at the story that we're going to be telling, and there's some very important details to get through. Some of you might be very familiar with the people and the characters, some of them may not. That's all right. So for the sake of getting us all on the same page, I'm going to go ahead and just summarize the outline, the details for you guys. So here we go. Obviously, this is going to be, it's in the Bible, so it's referencing Israel, especially in the Old Testament, which is where we're going to be. So almost all of that's either Israel or Egypt for the most part. So the time period is about 1000 BC or BCE, however you like to consider time. So it's about 3,000 years ago. And in perspective, it's about 1,000 years before the Roman Empire even was a thing. So just a really long time ago. They did not have cars at that time, as far as we know. So Israel's situation. Israel was this nation of tribes, kind of like states, this kind of union of states, so to speak. But there were several powers and nations and people groups trying to expand their kingdom and try to break up the nation and tribes of Israel, which at this time, the land that Israel had was essentially the crossroads of the world, right? If you wanted to go from the east to whether Europe, or you want to go down to Egypt, which is a superpower, Israel was essentially like the main crossroads, and lots of people wanted this land. It was highly sought after. Some of the groups you may know, some you may not. But places that wanted to divide and conquer Israel and kind of take over that land were places like Egypt, Assyria, the Hittite Empire, and then of course let's not forget the Philistines. So if you've gone to any Sunday school class as a kid, you probably have heard the Philistines. Not to be confused with Philippines. Those two different people groups, two different times in history. Anyways, so the Philistines were essentially neighboring Israel. They had access and control to all the weapons, and they threatened the trade routes of Israel running through their territory. And basically what would happen is that if the Philistines were able to take over, they would eventually strangle the economic life out of Israel. Sounds exciting, right? Again, this is all a precursor to understand kind of like what the story that we're coming in, like the story that we're coming in, it helps to understand the people and what's going on at that time. That's why I'm giving you guys this information. And I'm almost done, I hope. But so again, one of the biggest things they wanted to do, they wanted to control pretty much all of their weapons. And the Philistines had control of the blacksmiths, so they got to charge an ungodly amount for any weapons for any Israelites, thus basically disarming almost the entire nation. And if you were really, really rich, like the king, like Saul, or his son Jonathan, you could be able to own a weapon. But other than that, there wasn't much going on. There were stories where, at that time, where they were going into battle, and you only had a few people who had actual weapons. Other people had to use their farming equipment as their weapons, which is not great when someone has like a shield and a sword and breastplates and all the whole deal. It's kind of a rough situation. So Israel was kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place as far as national security was concerned. A couple of the supporting actors in the time frame that we're looking at, there were two main people. Samuel was the prophet, and Eli was the priest. These were very, very good people. They led Israel well. But it's important to know this because Israel had this lovely cycle which Israel is essentially, their story is a story of all of humanity. All of humanity acts like this, where they would be led by great people. They would follow God. They would be good to each other. Israel would be just the prime example of what it's like to live life in peace and adventure, all the good things of life, right? Israel had all of it. Well, then when their leader died, they would, sometimes immediately, sometimes it would take about a generation, but then they would fall away, and they would start making very horrible decisions that humans are known to make. They would start acting like the worst of humanity. And then, after a while, they become servants or slaves of another people group, basically because they've made all these poor choices, and now another nation's ruling them, and they're in these horrible situations. And they cry out to God and ask God for help. And then God would send another great man or woman or somebody to lead them and to free them. And then they would fall back out. You know, it's a wash, rinse, repeat. Israel is in this horrible cycle. But Samuel and Eli at the time, they were the main religious leaders, and they were getting old. So Israel was pretty much about to start making some questionable decisions again. So the main characters, tonight we're looking at David, Jonathan, and Jonathan's armor bearer. Jonathan was Saul's son. He was the prince, basically. He was assumed to be the next king of Israel. David was a shepherd, likely a teenager, when he had his first military battle of David and Goliath legend, who inadvertently won over the hearts and minds of pretty much the entire nation, including the prince, Saul's son, Jonathan. And then Jonathan's armor bearer, because that's a mouthful, and I'm already thirsty. I'm going to call him Jab for short, okay? You guys cool with that? Cool.
What's his name, actually?
We don't know.
Jabba
Jonathan, Jab.
Jamming 10 and
Jabba?
The Jabba
He has a hut. No, so Jabba was a guy who had to be relatively close to Jonathan. Of course, he was armor, but he held the weapons of Jonathan. He was the guy who would go into battle with Jonathan and handle all of his armor. Thus, the name that we have is Jonathan's armor bearer. But he didn't really have any weapons himself, at least in some of these stories. The story we're going to read tonight, he didn't have any weapons himself. So basically, when it came to the point where Jonathan's like, hey, give me my sword, I want to go cut down some enemies, he's like, all right, here's all of my attack weaponry. I'm going to hand it over to you. Now I've got nothing to protect me. Basically, I'm a human shield. So that was kind of his situation. But he does have a fun role to play. But so now that everybody kind of has a good overview of what's going on, let's get into the story. The first main point, the best friendships should help you grow. And you can even take a look at your list. And that's what we're going to kind of talk about for a minute is the best friendships should help you grow. And we're going to look at Jonathan and David. So it was clear that David was to be the next king of Israel, not Jonathan. I wish I had time to go into all of this. There is quite a bit of text. But I'll read us just a one-off verse to kind of get to this point. I'll read this short story. So after David had finished talking with Saul, he met Jonathan, the king's son. There was an immediate bond between... I'm sorry. Might as well keep reading. There's an immediate bond between them for Jonathan. Loved David. From that day on, Saul kept David with him and wouldn't let him return home. So David cannot go back to his own home. David had to stay with Saul, the king. And Jonathan made a solemn pact with David because he loved him as he loved himself. Jonathan sealed the pact by taking off his robe and giving it to David. It was a ceremonial thing that they did. It was kind of a cool thing. Whatever Saul asked David to do, David did it successfully. So Saul made him a commander over the men of war, and appointed an appointment that was welcomed by the people and Saul's officer alike. So everyone liked the fact that David was over David was basically the warrior, the general. When the victorious Israelite army was returning home after David had killed the Philistine, women from all the towns of Israel came out to meet King Saul, which King Saul gets credited for it. That's cool. They sang and danced for joy with tambourines and cymbals. This was their song. Saul has killed his thousands, David his 10,000s. So you guys can already see there's a bit of a, doesn't sound so good when the king is getting knocked down a peg there. This made Saul very angry. What's this, he said. They credit David with 10,000 and me with only thousands. Next they'll be making him their king. So from that time on, Saul kept a jealous eye on David. The very next day, a tormenting spirit from God overwhelmed Saul, and he began to rave in his house like a madman. So the king is acting like a madman now. He's going crazy. David was playing the harp as he did each day, but Saul had a spear in his hand, because that's just what you do as a king, I guess, right? You have a spear in your hand. Then he suddenly hurled it at David, intending to pin him to the wall, but David escaped him twice. And this is kind of the main verse here, is that Saul was then afraid of David, for the Lord was with David and had turned away from Saul. There's further backstory to go into. Again, 1st and 2nd Samuel are really incredible books, give a lot of history. Saul, God was with Saul, there were some incredible things, but Saul, who was the king, the first king of Israel, by the way, was able to say, look, God's not even with me anymore. He's clearly with David. But Saul was very intent on Jonathan, his son, becoming king after him. Right? So it was a very important thing to Saul. Now, Jonathan, speaking as a friend, Jonathan helped David grow, right? They were close friends. Jonathan, there's another verse in there that talks about how Jonathan could see that God was no longer with his father, but God was with his friend David. And so Jonathan could have chosen the easy path. He could have done, just the convenient thing and not really helped his friend out all that much, because after Jonathan's dad died, Jonathan was going to be king. But basically, Jonathan was willing to give all that up so that David could actually be king, as the way God was going to lead in that. And by all accounts, Jonathan probably would have made a good king. He had the courage to stand up to his father and make the right choices when his father was making bad ones. He had the intelligence and diplomacy to ally himself with a brave military leader, which is his friend David. He had his nation's best interests at heart. He submitted to God's authority, and very importantly, he had the humility to step down even when it meant he wouldn't be the one to shine. So, again, by all accounts, Jonathan would have made a good king. But David made a great king, arguably the best in all of the nation of Israel. Every king that came after him, by all accounts, David was probably the best king ever. They actually called the reign of David and his son the golden years of Israel. Like they were the best years. They were like, that's what you look to, right? That's kind of like us saying, like, man, George Washington was like the best president, right? We think of somebody like, I don't care. The point is, it was kind of like that, right? So Jonathan was able to step away from the good to be for something great to happen, for his friend to grow. And there's a story in there. We're running out of time. I don't go read 1 Samuel chapter 20. It's a really cool story where essentially what happens is David's like, look, your dad's out to kill me. Jonathan's like, really? I don't think so. I don't know. And I'm sure surely he would tell me. He's like, well, he's not going to tell you this. And so they make a plan together and a pact together. Like, look, talk to your dad. If he's going to kill me, like if I've done something wrong, kill me yourself. Like, just do it, right? And Jonathan's like, no, that's just dumb. I'm not going to do that. Stop being silly, David. And so basically, they made a plan. It's like, look, talk to your dad. If your dad is going to actually kill me, then let's work out a plan where you send me a coded message. And if everything is safe and I'm just worrying over nothing, well, then you'll send me a coded message and we'll be fine. So they worked that out. Jonathan made a promise to each other right there, and they did that. So, and that's where Jonathan went from the convenience of something that's good to helping his friend grow and become great. So the best friendships help you grow, right? And convenience, for the sake of just being convenient, and a lot of times we sacrifice great things for something that's okay, or it's good. This isn't too bad. So we'll sacrifice this thing that's great, that's right, this opportunity right in front of us, that we'll sacrifice that and just choose something that's good or the easy path. And so that's definitely not good when there's greatness ahead. So, take a look at your list. Is there anybody who has helped you step into a greater place, right? Who's not let you just settle in your life? Maybe think of it that way. Is there anyone on your list who would say, man, I would probably say more often than not, this person would probably not let me settle? Keep the name on the list. If you think that person will let you just do you, do your thing, good, bad, or ugly, whatever, just go have fun, strike that name off the list. All right? Okay, so moving on.
Strike my name off the list if you have your
Wow, okay.
I read you
We'll have to talk about that later.
Your name doesn't
okay.
even go on my friendly list.
The best
You guys
friendships.
are tight in here.
Yeah.
I'm just being honest. Want me to lie? I'm not doing it.
The best friendships should never let you leave. Should never leave you alone.
I don't have anyone on my list.
All right.
His friendship is a
Oh.
magic.
The best friendships should never leave you alone. Jonathan and Jonathan's armor bearer. So Jab, okay? Hey guys. Jab was a faithful servant and likely friend, which is why we're talking about him in the course of friendship, who refused to let Jonathan go into battle alone, even when their odds of success were incredibly low. So if you read 1 Samuel chapter 14, just a couple chapters back, there's a really cool story going on where, again, there's like no weapons to be used, and Israel's losing heart. Saul's ready to give up, and Jonathan says basically like, no, we're not just going to give up. So him and his armor bearer sneak off, go in this really weird valley that they're going through. It's kind of a tough climb, and there's this Philistine garrison, there's this fort essentially, outpost or whatever, sitting up on this hill. And so Jonathan says, hey, come with me. Maybe God will be with us. Which, by the way, if you're going to go with insurmountable odds, it's one thing if someone says, hey, God's with us, let's do this, right? And there's some encouragement, right? Because, like, hey, regardless, this person believes that we're going to win, so maybe it's worth a shot. Jonathan doesn't even say that. He said, maybe God will be with us, right? Like, maybe. There's a chance. Maybe not.
It's like an automatic red flag.
Right, exactly. It's like the biggest red flag. We're going to just go do it anyways, man. We're going to die anyways. Let's go ahead and just do this, right?
No.
So they go up there. Again, from all bits of historical information we can look at, the armor bearer, there was just the one sword between the two of them, right? So armor bearer is like, he says, let me make sure I read this correctly because it's a really incredible way that he says this. His armor bearer said to him, "Do all that is in your heart, do as you wish. Behold, I am with you, heart and soul." That's a pretty bold statement, right? It's not like the do you your truth or you do you or you just whatever, man, that's cool, right? No, he's like, you do whatever you with you. You do whatever you're gonna do, and whether it's good or bad or whatever the outcome is, I believe in you, and I'm with you, heart and soul. I am fully in here on this. We're going to do this. And as the story goes, it's actually an incredible story. They get up there, and they basically they create this little test and says, okay, if God is going to be with us and we're going to be successful, we're going to ask him a question, and this is what's going to happen. If they answer this way, we know God's with us, and if they answer this way, then we know that it sucks, right? So why try? So they as the story goes, they went on. They answered in the specific way. So they're all right, cool. So they went up there, and this entire, probably about the size of a basketball court, roughly. There was about 20 or so enemies, all with weapons, all ready to do their thing. And you got these two guys who decided, all right, cool. And they took them out. They completely wiped out the garrison. It was really cool. And that actually, this is one of those things where it helped, make Jonathan a good leader. Like, not only did they do that, they also helped revitalize the rest of the Israelite army. So, guys, but I really want to focus on that. His armor bearer wasn't going to let him go alone, right? He, whether they were going to live or whether they were going to die. Now, again, I know for us that seems like that's pretty dramatic, and is life and death as middle and high school seems like sometimes it's not quite as deadly as fighting with swords against people who know what they're doing, right? But the point is, he was willing to not let him go alone. And that kind of reminds me of another story. I'll go over this very quickly. There's a particular character in the Bible, about 1,000 years later, by the name of Thomas, who was a disciple of Jesus. A lot of times people like to call him Doubting Thomas. That's not his name. It's never once in the Bible does the Bible call him Doubting Thomas. Because it's a story for another time, but we really like to label people based off of a singular instance of a dysfunction.
Because
we like to judge people.
Love judging.
But the problem is when we judge people by a single moment in their life, it becomes a problem. So when people think Thomas is this big doubting guy, well, here's a fun like 20-second story, 30-second story here. If I can, I'll do my best. So Lazarus, maybe you guys probably know about Lazarus. Lazarus died. Jesus is going to go raise Lazarus from the dead. At this point, Jesus was the only person on the planet who knew what was going to happen. Everybody else was like, well, this guy died. He was a friend of ours. We need to go visit him. Well, if you know much about Jesus or know much about Rome and Israel, everybody wanted to kill Jesus, it seemed like. All the leaders, they wanted to literally kill Jesus. Several times in the Bible, you'll read where basically Jesus and his disciples snuck out through the crowd or something and escaped death. Well, Thomas, when they found out that they were just going to basically go for the funeral, the rest of the disciples are like, Jesus, we don't have to go there. Right? Like, last time we were there, they tried to kill us, so we really don't have to go back and add to the tomb, right? Like, we don't want to add extra people. And Thomas, before Jesus said anything, Thomas spoke up to the rest of the if we're going to call people by a singular moment of failure, the rest of the cowards. And he said, look, let us go also, because Jesus was going. He knew that was going to happen. Like, let us go with him also so that we can die too. If Jesus is going to go and they're going to kill him, let's go die with him.
That's chill.
Yeah, that's Doubting Thomas for you, right? There's not a lot of doubt right there, right?
That's a friend.
Right, but that's a friend, and that's kind of the heart and soul, right? Like, I'm not going to just leave my friend alone. I'm going to continue to go with them. Whether they're hurting or whether they're making good choices or bad choices. I mean, you can't override somebody else's free will, but the idea that you're not going to just let them suffer alone, right? You're going to go with them. You're with them heart and soul. So the best of friendships should never leave you alone. So take a look at your list again. On the friend side, anybody who, again, your life may not be as dramatic, okay? I get that. It may feel like it at times. But anybody who doesn't have that mentality that they're willing to leave you alone, strike that name out too. And hopefully on the other side, you can maybe mark on those lists we're friendly, because again, we're looking in at ourselves. We're looking in at ourselves as well. Guys, well, before I lose you,
Probably not.
hey guys, let's finish this up. On the friendly side, hopefully you can look at that, think about anybody who you have not let them suffer, not let them go through things alone, or when you people who you've tried to help them grow. Hopefully you can put some names on that list, that side as well. And in conclusion, right, I'll wrap this up, we can be done. The best friendships should be intentional, right? Friendships, just like any other type of relationship, don't just happen. Sometimes there's work to it that you're not conscious of it, but really any relationship or friendship, as we're talking about, there's intentionality to it, right? You have to make effort into it. So ideally you have friends in your life who go beyond just someone who has something in common with you, right? It's important to have someone to hang out with, someone to talk to, and someone who can influence your life in a good way. But these are just some of the basics, just the entry-level part of that position of what it takes to be a good friend. If our lives are shaped by our relationships, which is true, then would you say it's a good idea to make sure that you have people in your life who exhibit some of these great traits that we talked about? So if your life is going to be shaped by the people who you surround yourself with, for better or worse, isn't it good to surround yourself with people who are going to help you grow and who aren't going to just let you go it alone?
Around
All right?
people.
And it's important to have special people in our lives who treat us like this. Then isn't it also fair to say that we should be treating other people like this? Now, every human has capacity, right? You know, some people might only have the capacity for one person like this in their life, or two or three. Some might be able to stretch it to 5 or 10, but that's stretching it, right? So there are really, really close friendships, and then there's good friendships. You know, so that's for another talk. As far as like how close you are to other people and how you let them get to you. But the idea is that obviously you want somebody who's going to help you grow, to influence you in your life as like a peer, but you also want to be like that for somebody else, because that just seems unfair, right? You want somebody to be like this for you, someone to help you grow, but you don't want somebody, you don't want to influence somebody else, you don't want to help somebody else grow. Again, none of this is overriding somebody else's free will.
That's kind of a stressful thing, though. Like,
well,
if we're being honest, like,
yeah,
if you give a bad piece of advice, or like you try to help someone and then flop majorly, you just.
So you're saying if you fail at giving advice,
yeah,
you're trying to influence somebody and you do it wrong?
Like depending on the situation,
I see. Yeah,
you just majorly affected that person's life in a negative way.
That's a really good question. So that's why there should be intentionality in what we do, and I will say this. The majority of yourself does often override a single piece of bad information, and at the end of the day, it's everybody does have free will, so you can influence them in a direction. And the best thing, so would it be a good idea to try to influence a friend's life in a way that you don't know much about? So that's why. Yeah. I mean, there's a question. You can. Yeah. Well, I mean, yes or no. It doesn't have to be rhetorical. But ideally, yeah. If you're gonna influence somebody's life in a good way. In any way, you'd hopefully either want to know enough about the situation, which is what part of being the good friends would have to do with. But the other side of it is there are certain principles in life that are true universally, and that's kind of some of the things like we're talking about tonight. Helping people go from good to great, helping people grow, and then not leaving them alone, not letting them go through a situation alone. And which, to answer your question in a roundabout way there, Ben, would be to come back around and even if you do help influence them in a way that you did not foresee it going as badly as it did, not just saying, well, sucks for you, see ya. You help them and you walk with them along that journey.
And then depending on how they react to it, though.
You can't see every situation. Yeah.
What I mean? You know your friends by their fruit. You know who's going to give you good advice and bad advice. And if someone that you know is a good person ends up giving you bad advice, you'll at least know that their heart was in the right place and they were trying to give you good advice.
Right. Right. And that's what I said, obviously, I mean, it's not a wise thing, like we talked about, wisdom previously. It's not really a wise thing to just say, hey, here's what you do. So, for example, let's fast forward, half a dozen or so years from now, and you guys are in a place where you may or may not, you're debating on buying a house, right? And your friends are also wanting to buy a house. Well, that's cool. Well, I mean, you can't tell your friends, like, you got to get this house, right? I mean, you can give influence, you can give, suggestions. And, well, I don't know why that house came up. But, like, sometimes when you're an adult, like, you think of, it's hard to think, backwards. Well, let's say, take college, right? That's a good one. Let's say college. Let's say you have a friend. Let's say, hold on, okay. Whatever you think or feel about college, it is, whatever it is. Let's say you have a friend who is considering going to college for some degree that does not really going to do much. And they're going to be on loans. And you say, you should go for it, man. Totally go for that degree that's going to be useless. And get those 80 German polka, musical theory, and get your $85,000 degree. Okay, so
You definitely took the German polka.
I shall take toilet drumming.
3, 2, 1. Okay, so we only have a couple minutes. I'll finish this up. So basically, the idea is like, if you're not, don't suggest something to them that you wouldn't think is a good idea, but let them make that choice. Does that make a little bit more sense? Like, don't be making just off the wall suggestions to your friends. Seriously. But yes, there is a responsibility to your recommendations and to your influence. And so that's why it's important to live intentionally, because if you live just whatever, you're still responsible. No one's probably going to hold you responsible per se, but you still have that bit of responsibility with the influence that you give. And I'll finish this up. Basically, if we're intentional about our friendships, we can actually take control of that part of our lives. There are some things in life you can control, some things you can't, but if you can be intentional about your friendships, you can have control of that in your life, and you can make sure you're surrounded by great people who are going to inspire you and move you forward, and you can inspire them and move them forward. In doing so, you have a huge advantage over most of the people your age who are basically just kind of wandering throughout life without going directionally, going in an actual direction. So the main points real quick: the best friendships should help you grow, the best friendships should never leave you alone, and the best friendships are intentional. Like I said, take a look at your note cards, and if you and feel free to take it home. If you took it seriously, take a look at the names that are remaining on the friends list.
Everyone.
If you got everyone, that's awesome. Hopefully you have some. If not, that doesn't mean, I'm not saying in any way that you need to distance yourselves and just get away from those people who are not on the list. Basically, it's about taking an honest look at this list, at your friends, and consider the time and influence that certain people have in your life. You surely have people who don't quite make the list, or maybe their name was on there but it got scratched out. And maybe they're good or just okay friends. Maybe they're not like great, but they're okay, and that's fine. Just keep them as your friend. But this doesn't mean that you have to cut. I'm in no way, make this loud and clear, I am in no way suggesting at all, zero, zip, nada, that you cut these people out of your life who got cut from the list. That is not what I'm saying.
Are you going to be a hermit?
Yep.
Okay, now that I interrupted, let me repeat myself. And this is my last point. So,
I'd be down with
if you want to, however long you want to stay, Ben, or how long you want to make everyone else stay. This does not mean that you have to cut them out of your life. It just means that you can be aware of the influence that they have with you and how much the influence that you have with them, and make wise choices with this information. I trust you guys. You guys are awesome. You can make wise choices. I believe in you. So again, I'm not trying to tell you to cut people out of your life. Just the fact that you can be aware of the influence that people have in your life and that you can have in their life, and the kind of the evidence that they produce as far as being a good friend or a great friend. Again, if you are aware of it, you can know, you can be intentional, and you can be able to move forward and grow in life at a much better rate than even anybody, young, adult, whatever, who is just letting life happen to them instead of taking control over certain portions of your life that you can. Cool.